Thank you very much, and welcome to Conversations, the program where we take ideas and bring them into life. Today on the program, we are going to be talking with Doug Grindle, who has had quite an experience in Afghanistan, in Iraq. His years of service in the government includes working with the Defense Department, USAID, and recently he ran for state representative here in this district. And so we want to talk to Doug about what's important to him, some of his experiences, and we appreciate him being at this table. Doug, welcome. Thanks very much for being here.
Oh, thank you very much for having me along. It's just wonderful, that the people are interested in the subject of Iraq and Afghanistan and what's going on, so appreciate it.
It's a very concerning topic, obviously. We've been in these wars and conflicts for a number of years. Let's start with Afghanistan, since our presence is still there today. It's had quite a history, hasn't it, with the Soviets being there before and other kinds of foreign involvement. I imagine the folks who you know and have known have really, had to endure quite a bit in this process.
Yeah, this is the thing, is that people don't really understand just how bad shape Afghanistan was in back in 2001. Basically, if you think about the Soviets coming over and invading the place in the late 70s, and it's a population of 8 million people, and they killed between about 1 million people. And then another couple million went to Pakistan. And so you had basically a situation, if you can even imagine a country which ceased to really have any meaningful education, which ceased to have any meaningful economy, where most of the people of any importance had to leave because otherwise they'd be at great risk of being killed, a huge societal dislocation, and basically the whole country falling apart. Then that's what it was like. And so then the Taliban come in the 90s, and then they have a civil war, and then that goes on. So by the time 2001 rolls around, you have a country where people who are already impoverished now have not had a working economy, not really, for 25 years. They've really not had any schooling. The government hasn't worked very well. And so, people over there, they look back at the 60s and 50s as sort of this golden age when their country was actually making progress. Now, people say, Afghanistan's hard for us to even comprehend, because people over there, except for in the cities, they live in mud houses made of mud and straw mixed together with mud roofs, and it looks, to all intents and purposes, like a very sort of like backward society. But these people have a very proud history, and they're also a history of education. So, when you have this coming along, it's hard to imagine just what it's been like for the people. And then add on top of that, our experience there since 2001.
What motivated the Soviets to basically go into the country in the first place?
Well, the Soviets had this, if you think about the Soviet Union, it was really the Russian Empire. So all of its southern periphery countries were vulnerable, or so they felt. And so they felt that having unstable Afghanistan right below their southern periphery, which was Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and places like that, they thought, well, gosh, if Afghanistan, starts to let in the Americans or becomes unstable because Afghanistan had some internal sort of conflicts, then, that's going to erode out the belly of our empire. And so they didn't want that. So they went in to stop the instability. They went in to shore up a communist government there, and the whole thing just went to hell in a handbasket, and they had to pour more and more people in because they were expecting people would say, the Afghans would say, oh, that's a good idea to keep it stable. And instead, the Afghans were basically said, get out of our country or we're going to shoot you. And that's what they did. And so they poured more and more people in to shore up these communist regimes, which in turn killed people as well. So, it was just a nightmare that got worse and worse.
And in turn, brought about the predictability of what the Soviets were worried about in the first place, and that was instability, wasn't it?
How ironic. Yeah, absolutely. So, and then the sad thing is, though, is that, the great powers are messing around with this, and the local people suffer. So, it's what would happen is you have a village, and they'd say it's on the outskirts of Kandahar. Well, the Soviets would come in, and they would drop, troops off with helicopters. They'd try and trap the insurgents at that time. And so there'd be these enormous firefights. And so then the Soviets will pull back, and then, and this would go on for years, where the Soviets would start at one end of a valley and just take their tanks and roll up the entire valley and then come back down. And, and every time they did this, people got hurt and people got killed. And, it's very difficult to make the education system work. It was very difficult to make the farmers able to sell their crops when this works. So it just goes on for years and years. And then even worse, all of these people, they go over to Pakistan. Well, it turns out now that Pakistan, far from learning the lesson that perhaps they should help Afghanistan, given these people in need. I mean, they helped them in the sense of having camps. But now, for the last 12 years, according to Carlotta Gall and basically everybody in Afghanistan, U.S. and Afghan alike, they've been basically pushing supporting the Taliban to make things worse in Afghanistan. So, you see this whole thing, it just gets, the snowball gets bigger and bigger, and it just gets worse and worse, and the ordinary people are the ones that suffer.
Well, and the insurgents who were fighting the Soviets, who were they?
They were basically a collection of, there's two kinds. There was the moderates, and then there was the hardliners. And so what would happen is that the Pakistanis had no love of the moderates. And so what they would say is they would tell the Americans spent billions. For every dollar that the Americans spent, the Saudis would spend another dollar. So Americans spent billions. You've seen Charlie Wilson's war. That's how it went down. And so what would happen is that, but the Americans never spent it. They'd give it to the Pakistanis to spend it. And that way they could, not outrage the Soviets. So the Pakistanis would basically decide who got the stuff. And the stuff went to 7 groups. Of those groups, 4 of them were hardliners, 3 were moderate or semi-moderate. And the Pakistanis felt that they could control the hardliners a lot better, but also the guy in charge of Pakistan at the time, he was a hardliner too. So guess where all the money went? It went to the hardliners. Well, the CIA said, look, you got to spread it around. You got to give it to the moderates as well. Well, yeah, that's not what happened, because the CIA at the end of the day, their prime responsibility was to destabilize the Soviets in Afghanistan. And so what ended up happening is the CIA pushed for moderates to get the stuff. Didn't really happen, so the hardliners got it. So fast forward, and lo and behold, the moderates, thanks to a guy called Ahmad Shah, basically they became powerful despite all of this, despite this ridiculousness. And so, but still, the moderates were outnumbered and outgunned by the hardliners. And so people say, oh yeah, we caused. Our support of the insurgents against the Soviets caused what happened later, but that's not necessary. It's not strictly true. I mean, we tried to do what we could, but given the strictures of the time, the CIA couldn't really do much about it. I mean, did they try hard enough? They probably could have tried harder. But when when everybody else is saying just do it this way, there's not much you can do. Mm-hmm. So
interesting. And so the Soviets kind of found this after a while as their Vietnam, and start to pull back?
The Soviets basically never won. The Soviets basically bled out tens of thousands, 15,000 troops. And then they left because they just basically figured, okay, well, we've had enough. This is as the Gorbachev came through, glasnost was happening, and they said, okay, we're done doing this stuff. Basically, the Soviets ran out of money. And partly because of this, partly because of Star Wars, in my opinion, partly because of the arms race in general, they ran out of money, so they pulled out of Afghanistan. But they did not cease to support the Afghan government at the time, which is communist. And as long as they gave money to them, the communist government stayed in place. So it took years before the communist government actually fell.
Right. Our involvement came about, did it come about around the same time as Iraq, or was it just two converging historical factors here, 9/11 and so forth, where we became more involved in both theaters?
Well, I mean, 9/11 caused us to go into Afghanistan. So, the thing about Iraq is that it was seen as part of the global war on terror. I think every major intelligence agency around the world, in the Western world anyway, said that there were weapons of mass destruction, but it was not the original global war on terror. Didn't start there. It started in Afghanistan. And so, unfortunately, though, what happened is that as America became more enmeshed in Iraq, is that resources which could have flowed to Afghanistan did not flow to Afghanistan, whether it was like civilian rebuilding, whether it was like propping up the indigenous Afghan forces, whether it was really just attention. And so you'd go over there, and I'd go over there. I started going there in 2004. And then there was this enormous bureaucratic dislocation because you had the Americans in charge of like one part of Afghanistan, but other countries in charge of other parts. There was a NATO mission. It was like an American mission. You had Operation Enduring Freedom. You had like the ISAF stuff on top of it, and it was just like a dog's dinner of like all these competing nationalities, these competing regional commands. The whole thing just didn't work properly. And frankly, we lost track of what was going on. And it wasn't until late 2005 that really the British even went back down and settled back down in Helmand. Okay, so this is what happens in a war. If you have an insurgency of people coming across the border, because again they come from Pakistan, and they got no Taliban are pushed out. Well, they sit there on the other side for about a year, and then they're like, well, let's go back in. Okay, boys, let's just do that. And so they come back in, and guess what if there's nobody there? Well, not much. And so for years and years and years, the Afghan security forces didn't have enough people to keep them out. And so what happens when that happens is that an insurgency is really nothing more than the villagers basically saying, who's going to win? We're on the side of the winners. And so you haven't got any Americans, not in most places. You haven't got any coalition troops, not in most places. You haven't got any Afghan troops, not in most places. I mean, it was a nightmare. So, the villagers are like, I'm supporting whichever side looks stronger. And that's exactly what happened. And the whole thing got worse until by 2008, everyone really had to catch their breaths and be like, this is terrible.
And the villagers basically were trying to live from day to day. They didn't have any real deep notion about support of any particular faction?
The villagers, time after time after time, have told me personally, hey, I'm glad that you guys are here. It's terrific that you're here to keep the Taliban out, to keep to give our country a chance. All we've ever wanted is a chance, and thank you for being here to do this. The villagers have a strong predisposition towards their government, towards the West, because they see their government as basically being the Afghan government. They see Taliban as being somewhat illegitimate, sort of like now they're based in Pakistan. They know that Pakistanis are pushing a bunch of people in, so it's got that sort of Pakistani odor, so to speak. And so, honestly, there's probably going to be 30,000 fighters at the top side. There's going to be 15% of a population of 16 million that don't like the government and but there's a lot of people who are simply on the fence or would like to support the government, but they can't do that because if the government's not around, how do you support a government when the Taliban's going to come in and say, okay, you guys are on our side? Well, I guess we have to be. And then the Taliban will say, oh, not only are you on your side, but you got to give us 2 guys from this village to go and fight. Okay, and by the way, it's like
they keep upping the ante.
Yeah, and then in the last few years, then the Taliban will also give people that want to go and fight a motorcycle, a gun, and a wage. And so, sure, they just keep on saying even more and more to be on our side, and it works to a certain extent. But it doesn't mean people are actually pro-Taliban. It just means that that's just the way it is.
Right.
So
if you came in with a better economic development program, because destabilization here seems to coincide with terrorism issues, not only in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, so isn't that really part of the answer?
Well, put it this way, you can't, yes it is and no it isn't. Okay, so, and it goes like this. So bear with me, just very briefly. You can't give enough money away to make people not fight. because you simply can't do it. I mean, even though like in Afghanistan, people will only get paid $200 a month now and be happy, you can't give away that much money to like, millions and millions of people. So what you can do, however, so we can't just give away stuff out of the problem. But we can do is make sure that the markets are actually working, which is why the American government has spent a lot of money putting in roads badly. And also like, and it's also supposed to have been like helping the markets. But, I mean, I worked for USAID for 2 years. I think it's a very nice organization. I think it misses the boat on a lot of things. Now, for instance, if you're going to like export stuff out of Afghanistan, where is it supposed to go? It could go to Kazakhstan north. It could go to like Pakistan to the east. But the Pakistanis don't really want this stuff. Your natural market is Delhi. Okay, well, when's it we give Pakistan billions and billions of dollars, and it's impossible for an Afghan trader to sell their stuff in Delhi. To get to Delhi, you have to go from Afghanistan through Pakistan and get to Delhi. But the Pakistanis don't like the fact that the Afghans are going to transit their country. They say that they don't trust them, but in actual fact, it's just simply they don't want Afghanistan having that kind of like linkage. They don't want to, So they're going to like stop the linkage by saying, you guys are not allowed to sell in Delhi because we're not going to let you get through the country. And so, okay, wouldn't you thought that the American, okay, back to your original question, you can't give away enough stuff to make the insurgency go away, but you can stoke the markets to make that happen. Wouldn't you have thought that the #1 priority would be America to actually like gain access for markets in Delhi and the rest of India on a ground transportation route? Well, I was there in 2013 and, you talk to some of the USAID guys down in like Kandahar and you're like, hey, how's it going on that like, across Pakistan land route? Oh, well, we're still working on it. Okay, 2013 seems to me 12 years after you went in there. If we can't figure that out, billions and billions of dollars after giving that to the Pakistanis, and 12 years after being there, I mean, honestly, are we a superpower? Are we just like, a bunch of dummies like running around in the sand?
Political issue versus
it's just
infrastructure versus money versus.
Step back, it's like, the American government for years has said, Pakistan, please don't support the Taliban. Oh, we don't support the Taliban. Okay, well, thank you very much for not supporting the Taliban. In actual fact, everybody knows that the Pakistanis support the Taliban. I mean, I've been on the border in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and, you talk with the U.S. guys there. The U.S. guys are crying out loud, and you're like, yeah, the Pakistanis shot at us again today. I mean, that's like, and the thing is that, I don't fault the Pakistani border guards when they got 50 guys who are like hanging out on the other side of the border and they just walk across right past their blockhouse for saying, hey, come on through. There's like 2 border guards there. They're not going to stop anything. But at the same time, like, people don't really realize just the complicity. I mean, like, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but the fact of the matter is like, the Quetta Shura in southern Pakistan runs the war in Afghanistan. And that Quetta Shura has an agreement with the Pakistani government that if you go too far north, they will be shot. But if you stay south of that demarcation is that you're okay. And you can like destabilize Afghanistan as much as you want. And please do, by the way. So, and I don't want to go into like, the whole history of it, but the simple fact is like, is the Pakistanis were instrumental in setting up the Taliban in the first place. They have always supported the Taliban, even during the civil war of the 1990s, and they continue to do so. And Uncle Sam has yet to recognize it officially that they do so. And instead, we give them billions of dollars, even when they're going to turn around and support the guys who are killing our guys.
It is very, now, your time there was also spent as a journalist and did a lot of reporting from there. Why don't we take a moment and have you set up a particular piece for us relating to what you did, and we'll take a look at that.
Well, I used to spend a lot of time with the Army, and Marines and Air Force and stuff like that, but mostly with the Army, and I used to go on patrols. So this is a story about and I used to like, my stories I would shoot them and edit them and deliver them. And so this story is in Paktika province on the eastern border, and it shows a patrol going up. And the only way that they could basically well, they're waiting for the Taliban to come across the border and attack them. So that's what it is.
Okay, let's take a look at that.
Soldiers from Fort Drum drive their Humvees up a steep slope onto a ridgeline close to the Pakistan border. Soldiers say insurgents stage in Pakistan and come across the border at will.
They use that border because they know we're not going to go in there because it's too political. So they have pretty good freedom of movement across that border. That's what we're trying to stop.
The patrol settles in for lunch. It will stay for long enough until the Taliban try to attack them. It's the best way, soldiers say, to destroy the insurgents.
For us to get them to attack us, we got to make it look like they've got the upper hand, that they can conduct a successful attack. So we'll go sit on one of these hilltops out here and stay and wait on them.
Suddenly, the patrol gets word that the Taliban are massing and about to attack.
More than likely, I have a feeling they're going to hit up from the front because Greason's got a ridge line right to the front of his truck.
Yeah.
They can't assault up this side. They can't do a frontal, and they can't come up that way. If they could, but it'd be suicide.
The soldiers call in airstrikes of Apache helicopters, which zero in on the Taliban positions. Several Taliban are killed and others are hiding in a cave, which the helicopters also hit.
If they're like just crawled in there to, inside a crevice to hide, chances of survival is 0. You're not going to live through that.
Just to be sure, the soldiers also call in a B-1 bomber strike and get off the ridgeline before the bombs drop. After the Taliban or Arab fighters fail to attack the American forces, it's likely they'll simply fall back toward the Pakistan border, regroup and try it all over again. Near Forward Operating Base Burmel, Doug Grindle for CBS 5 News.
Doug, very interesting. Reporting all of those kinds of things, being on the ground, and you did some work in Iraq also. Do you look at what's in the news today in regards to Iraq and how the military, dropped a lot of their weapons after being trained? The issues that I've heard about in terms of they'll get 100 bullets and sell 50 of them, all kinds of things that basically have changed the dynamic there. Is that a surprise to you?
Well, let me look at it in two ways. I have the greatest respect for the U.S. military, and the U.S. military said that we were dopes for not leaving 10,000 guys there to make sure the whole thing didn't fall apart. B, we never learn our lessons. If people are selling bullets, it's because there aren't enough to go around. And this is what happens. It's like, news report this week in Afghanistan. The head of in a district, he's saying that he's in his outposts. He has to dole out hand grenades to each outpost, 3 hand grenades per outpost. Now, that sort of thing happens in Iraq as well, right? Okay, so not to that extent, but if we look at what we left behind, do we leave behind a viable Air Force? No. Do we leave it behind, really a viable political situation? No. Do we and the essential, there's 2 things that we could have done by leaving some people behind. Is like we could have trained them better. And a lot of people say, oh, we couldn't train them any better. Well, that's probably true, but at the higher echelons, the logistics never work out, and it feels very bad when you're at the front line, you know that you're not going to get enough bullets or stuff to eat, which is exactly what happened in Anbar province, just a couple of months ago at this huge base. Ran out of bullets, ran out of stuff to eat, and everybody fled. So, at the same time, it's like the basic dynamic of these things is that if the government doesn't have a strong supporter, it's going to look to its basest, most nasty people who are its strongest supporters. Put it this way, it's like there's nothing to stop the government over there in Iraq from being more and more sectarian, more and more violent, more and more nasty, because we're not there to say, hey, if you guys moderate, we're going to help you out. But if you guys don't moderate, we're not going to help you out. There's no incentive for them to be moderate. You know what I mean?
And ISIS across the border in Syria sees all of this and sees an opportunity.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is that it doesn't take much to know that you're not facing all that much. I mean, ISIS is not Superman, but right. At the same time, they also they're probably paid better than the Iraqi army, and they're also they'll say, look, you guys having a battle, or just run away. And if you run away, we're not going to kill you. Well, okay, if some guy up at the front line is not really sure that he's not getting air support, he knows there's no medevac because we didn't leave money. He knows that there's really not enough artillery shells. He knows that like the whole thing is just not working out very well. Otherwise, oh, well, I could just run away. Well, maybe I'll just do that. He knows the generalship, because a bunch of these sectarian generals got in instead, isn't very good. And he's just like, why should I stay? Well, what he doesn't know, of course, is that as soon as he runs away, then they're going to come through and like catch him and shoot him in the head. But, you know, so if you're in the front lines in that situation, why wouldn't you do that? If the Americans had been there, they'd be like, okay, that general's bad guy, we're not going to work with him. We're going to make sure your logistics still work. I mean, 90% of this war stuff over there is the logistics. If they got enough stuff to eat and enough stuff to like bullets to fire and the vehicles work, then they have a chance.
Can we learn a lesson from what we did or didn't do in Iraq for Afghanistan in terms of how we pull back, how much that takes? Do we have the appetite to wait that long and be there that long?
Well, I mean, I think America's on the verge of making a serious mistake in Afghanistan, and it's going to do exactly what it did in Iraq, which is going to pull everybody out. We have one more year, it's going to pull everybody out. And what's going to happen, I'll tell you what, you know, is like the embassy is not a skilled enough negotiator to weave its way through the Afghan morass and understand who's who and make sure that all the Afghans are on the same side. We are very lucky we got like a guy called Ashraf Ghani in charge of like Afghanistan now. He's a good guy, a bit technocratic, kind of dull, writes terrible books, but he's still like, he's a good guy, you know. But the thing is that the embassy isn't up to the task of like just doing it all themselves. Because what you get is a rotation through. Every year, new people come in. Every year, I was like in a huge exception because I'd been there for years at a time. But that's not the way embassies work, you know. And so we're asking for short-timers to understand enough to make sure this doesn't happen. It's not going to work. What the Afghans really need, they need two things. They need like help on the ground, which they're not going to get after a year, in terms of like their logistics. It would be nice if they had an Air Force. Can you imagine 14 years later, no Air Force? Crazy. No medevac, none of that. So if you're wounded, you know, good luck. And then they also need money. They need, there are 350,000 people for the security forces, which cost $5 billion a year. They need another $2 billion to run the rest of the government, and that's all they need, $7 billion a year. Put that in perspective. Our state government in Massachusetts is $36 billion a year. So we're asking them to fight a war and run an entire country of 18 million people, which is 3 times our population, on 1/6 of the budget. It's crazy. And yet people say, oh, those Afghans are so unreasonable. Hello, you know, let's wake up and smell the coffee here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we basically have been in for 13 years, and you know, we have the responsibility to, but seeing what's happened in Iraq, it does make you really stop and think about, you know, our involvement, what our exit strategies are or not, and some of the issues that go on. Doug, unfortunately, we're up against the clock, but a fascinating discussion, very multiple in scope. Appreciate your being able to join us to talk about your experiences and give some perspective to this. And would like to have you back to be able to continue that. And we didn't even talk about your running for a state representative and just what kind of an experience that happened to be as well.
Well, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to be here. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for joining us. Doug Grindle has been my guest, involved in reporting from Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as being involved in the Defense Department and USAID. And we appreciate him being involved here, his service in the town as a town meeting member and so forth. And we appreciate the opportunity to chat with him about some of his experiences. And we thank you for joining us on Conversations. Join us next time. Thanks very much. Stay curious. See you then.